The Jordan Valley Campaign Part 2. Fight if you want to eat. After 38 years had passed, many of the former Israelites who lived in Egypt had died and had been replaced by a much greater multitude that had no inkling of what life was like in Egypt. This overwhelmingly young Israelite population was hungry for conquest in a literal sense. While the elders had enjoyed the commodities of Egypt many decades ago, the younger generation was eager to conquer the land that was, quote, flowing with milk and honey, end quote. The idea of a land flowing in abundance of food was likely a propaganda tool Moses used to stroke the flames of the youth, which indicates that the Israelites had little to eat. Remember, the Israelites had not a supply train or the ability to purchase food for some time. Whatever rations the early Israelites had would have been consumed quickly, like manna or quail. While the Israelites primarily ate manna and quail, the Levites were dining on the livestock, such as a bull, lamb, goat, pigeon, or a turtle dove 3 times a day, not to forget holy days and other occasions. Of course, the offering depended on what the common Israelite could afford to give up and provide as a sacrifice. This was still going on during the next generation of Israelites born in the wilderness, hence the near food riots that occurred. With a lack of provisions and water, the Israelites were in a state of semi-starvation during their 40 years in the wilderness. Therefore, it is safe to say that the older generation that came forth out of Egypt died from malnutrition and disease, while the older generation slowly passed away. The children also suffered from this semi-starvation roller coaster, which caused an increase in depression, distress, disease, illness, and apathy. Such feelings allowed Moses to instill the fear of the Lord in them, which allowed him a certain amount of control. Moses' use of fear, along with a lack of provisions due to food rationing, created a fervent and zealous people willing to do almost anything to reach the land flowing with milk and honey. Diplomatic reconnaissance. While the spy's report indicates that a direct or indirect attack would fail, an unmentioned number of Israelite warriors decided to test the Canaanites in the south. The Bible tells us that the incursion was based on the Israelites feeling guilty for not trusting the Lord. Because of this guilt, an unknown number assembled and attempted to make their way into Canaan to show that they did trust the Lord in an attempt to be forgiven for their sins. Moses made it clear before they departed that it would not work, because the Lord was not with them. While this is plausible, the fact of the matter is Moses was the one who likely orchestrated the incursion into Canaan. Remember, Moses is a military man. He needs to assess the spy's report with sandals on the ground before considering the next best route into Canaan. Moses therefore assembles a number of warriors to penetrate, collect intelligence, and to test the military capabilities of the Canaanites and their neighbors. Moses may have been considering an immediate attack if the conditions were favorable to the Israelites. In order to mask their infiltration, the Israelites avoided traversing the risky plains for fear of the Canaanites and Amalekites' charioteer corps, and took to the hills to observe the enemy. However, as the Israelite forces made their way into southern Canaan, they had no choice but to cross open terrain before entering the hill country. This brief exposure sealed their fate, as Canaanite scouts kept a close eye on them and informed their king at Arad, located in Negev, that a foreign force had entered his lands by way of Atarim. Afterwards, the king of Arad assembled his forces and called all allies living close by in the hill country. Once the Canaanites and Amalekite forces found the Israelites, they quickly engaged and defeated them, taking an unknown number of prisoners back with them. What is striking about the passage is that the Canaanites and Amalekite forces chased them all the way back to Hormah. Given that their mission started from Kadesh Barnea, one wonders how far they made it up north through the hill country. Even though the location of Hormah is relatively unknown, some maps that attempt to give a possible location show that it is still quite a distance from the Israelite camp at Kadesh Barnea. If the Israelite forces made it past Hormah, It suggests that the force sent into Canaan was not large enough by any substantial number. Therefore, the number of troops amounted to a few squads of shock troops conducting further reconnaissance. Once news of the debacle made it back to the Israelite camp, it devastated Moses. The 10 spies were executed earlier were proven right. The direct approach into Canaan was impossible. While the Bible states that Moses forbade the unauthorized excursion into Canaan, he was probably the one who gave the order to test the waters. When that operation failed, Moses quickly became a theological politician before his congregation in order to explain the disaster. Since a direct approach into Canaan was out of the question, Moses turned to the east. However, Moses encountered a problem. In order for him to get the Israelites into Canaan, he'd have to pass through the lands of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Moses' strategy to get the Israelites into Canaan would be one of diplomacy and negotiations. Moses assembled the Israelites and marched them to the Edomite border. Moses' strategy in dealing with the Edomites would be through kinship. According to the Bible, the Edomites were descendants of Esau, whereas the Israelites were descendants of his brother Jacob. Both Esau and Jacob were the sons of Isaac. Because of the distant connection between the two nations, Moses tried to persuade them to let the Israelites pass through the territory of Edom based on this relationship. Moses starts by explaining to the Edomites of the grief the Israelites had experienced in Egypt. Afterward, Moses gets straight to the point. Quote, "Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right nor to the left until we have passed thy borders." End quote. Edom did not budge and made it clear to Moses that if you attempt to enter the lands of Edom, quote, "I come out against thee with the sword." End quote. However, the Israelites begged the Edomites to allow them passage along the king's highway and made promises that, quote, "If I and my cattle drink of thy water, then I will pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet." End quote. Edom refused access to the Israelites again, and this time with a show of force. There are two reasons for Edom's refusal to allow the Israelites entry. The first is that the Israelites at their border are for the most part strangers to them. Yes, they are a kin, but after many centuries that kinship fades away and means little to nothing. Second, had Edom allowed the Israelites entry to traverse the king's highway, the Moabites, Amorites, Ammonites, and more importantly, as you shall read later, the Midianites might have retaliated. Moses had to have known that the Edomites were not going to let them pass directly through the territory. If you turn to the book of Numbers, chapter 20, verse 14, it indicates this rift continued between the distant relatives, but the rift was political on Edom's part, and the likelihood of an agreement was in doubt. Moreover, Moses could have engaged the Edomites, but decided it was best to conserve his forces for now. But there may be another reason for Moses' approach to the borders of Edom. Moses may have been collecting intelligence on the size and strength of the Edomite forces. In other words, the meeting at the border was nothing more than a diplomatic reconnaissance. After seeing that the forces of Edom posed no direct threat to his eastern flank, Moses ordered the Israelite camp to turn west before coming back east again. A psychological attack. Moses turned the Israelites west with one mission in mind: to attack the kingdom of Arad. The small Israelite force Moses sent to infiltrate southern Canaan earlier was discovered and defeated. Those who made it back to inform Moses of the terrible news also had valuable information that detailed the strength and weaknesses of the kingdom of Arad. In order to make a massive impact on Arad, Moses divided his forces to conduct a simultaneously hit-and-run attack on the villages of Arad. This quickly caused confusion. With report after report of devastation arriving at the king's court, the king had little time to call upon his allies for aid. Therefore, the king of Arad had to assemble his forces and meet the enemy head-on. While small to medium-sized teams of Israelite forces slashed and burned their way through Arad, the Israelite scouts were keeping an eye on Arad's military force. Once the forces of Arad were on the move, the scouts quickly rushed back to Moses. When Moses received the word of the enemy's movement, he quickly sent dispatches to the forces to rush back to his desired location. With the Israelite forces together, they awaited the main Arad battle force. When the army of Arad arrived and saw the Israelite forces, battle lines were drawn and the engagement commenced. Details of the battle are silent, but what is certain is that the Israelites came out victorious at Hormah. The only information concerning this campaign is that Israel, quote, utterly destroyed them and their cities, end quote. When considering the level of success the Israelite forces had in destroying the kingdom of Arad, one might ask why the Israelites did not occupy the region in order to establish a foothold in Canaan. Understand that news traveled fast, and in many of the straggling survivors and traveling merchants would have informed the nearby kingdoms of what had just happened. Because of this, many of those mini-kingdoms mobilized their forces and began moving into the affected area. Furthermore, the attack on Arad was a psychological attack. Moses had no interest in occupying the region that bordered Arad's powerful allies. Instead, a quick blindsiding and devastating hit-and-run attack would have a psychological effect on the enemy's morale. While the allies of Arad focused on the disturbances of the south of Canaan, Moses quickly moved his forces eastward away from the hot zone. If you like that little mini lecture, give me a thumbs up, leave comments below, no fighting. Next time I'll go ahead and discuss, we'll continue on with the Jordan Valley campaign, and of course it'll be part 3, and we'll start off with taking the road less traveled, which is going to be pretty deep, and so will the Midian campaign. Once we're done with that, that will actually be the end of Moses' military campaign through the Jordan Valley, as we will finish up with changing of the guard, which has to deal with the Levites. So until next time, take care, and I will see you later.